Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Resident Evil 0. In the last part, we made our way to the final area of the game, the treatment facility, and found Billy after we kind of lost him over a ledge a part or two ago. We also fought off a tyrant in the process, which kind of just happens out of nowhere. And now I'm using this room for what I was talking about last time, where that's going to be effectively my item drop point for effectively the rest of the game at this point. Notably, the room that had the Mimicry Marcus in it now has zombies, though I think if you left that Mimicry Marcus alone, it might still be here. I'm going on my way just to avoid the enemies, because I don't really care about killing all these guys. At most, I would want to kill one of them, because I have enough ammo for a lot of the enemies around here, but I want to make sure I have enough for the few boss fights that remain. I did, while I was playing, I have to decide whether I wanted to do this particular item gathering now or earlier, back when it was still just Rebecca around here. Because with Rebecca, I could have gotten around here a lot more safely without the enemies around, let alone all that, but getting it done in one trip mattered enough to me that the ammo I could spend along the way didn't really matter as much in my eyes. Plus, there's still a bit of ammo left in the area on top of the new rooms we haven't explored yet, so I'm mostly fine. So our actual next destination is the room before this room with the forklift, as now that we have Billy and Rebecca, we can actually do the puzzle that's in there. Now, if you had explored a bit more in this room earlier, even when it was just Rebecca, you would have noticed there's a valve handle in the far corner opposite from where we are in the room right now, effectively. And there's a ladder you can climb down right here. Down here are several boxes that Rebecca cannot push because she's not strong enough. We need Billy for this. But we still need Rebecca for this puzzle. We need them both because you might notice there's a grate in the middle that's kind of closing off the area. We need to have Rebecca push the switch to rotate that around as we go. So there are 4 total crates down here in 2 varieties. The wooden crates, which we want to eventually all get to the bottom of the screen effectively, so that when we fill this little dish with water, they'll float. And this gray crate that's, I think, meant to be made out of some sort of metal, or at least denser material. When you flood this entire section with water, that thing will not float on top of it, thus you won't have a complete bridge. The full form of this puzzle is rotating this grate right a couple of times while trying to get the wooden boxes from one end to the other. You might think on a first run that pushing the gray box onto either the grate or to the bottom is the right idea. No, you actually want to put that in the corner, which, while that might seem a little limiting, we have ways around getting stuff that way as it is. Honestly, this is probably one of my favorite crate pushing puzzles in the series, if only because it's not just pushing the crates from one side of the room to the other. There's a little bit of thought to put into it due to the fact there's 2 characters and one can rotate a grate. I like this a lot. I like this a lot more than the equivalent puzzle in Resident Evil 2, I'll tell you that much. With that said, if this game ever does get a remake, I see this puzzle probably being replaced with a new one that involves potentially 2 full players in the case they go for any potential co-op with that. Or is at least close to some of the puzzles in Resident Evil 5 in terms of how they use the AI companion should the case be available. Mind you, again, for a remake of this, they could go the angle where you can just swap between the 2 characters still if you're playing single player. Like this or Triforce Heroes has, technically. Do I see that being likely? Not exactly, but there's always the chance of it. Again, that requires a remake of this game to happen at some point, though, which, hey, I'd welcome, as I've said before. This and Code Veronica, I think, could really use one in a couple of regards. Especially in terms of addressing some information we've gotten more added to lore since that they could then introduce a little more... I think the word I want to use is gently. Or gingerly, at the least. Because it's interesting to think back to this era of Resident Evil when they were trying to have a very in-depth story that would lead more into Umbrella's origins in what was the original build of Resident Evil 4. But then, due to the development hell for itself went through effectively becoming, I think, 4 or 5 different games total. That entire section effectively just got pushed off, and the remnants of it were kind of collected into Resident Evil 5 loosely. Very loosely. With that said, since we got Billy back up here and those 3 wooden crates in place, we can now flood this ditch, get those wooden crates on up there, and we can walk on over to get ourselves that valve handle. Whenever this and Remake animate water in the pre-rendered backgrounds, it looks absolutely insane for the era, by the way. I brought up last time the background graphics supervisor. But in general, the background graphic director and designers, on top of everyone else involved in that team, did so much good work. The background graphic director in this case being Hiroshi Kasajima, who did some QA for World of Final Fantasy, as in the special thanks section for Breath of the Wild. But in terms of direct development stuff, they did this. They did some design support for Oogie's Revenge. They were design director for Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins, and they were design support for Revelations and the Mercenaries. They also did some castle modeling for Tosei, for Fire Emblem Fates, Conquest, and Birthright. I'll talk about the background graphic designers in a moment, though, because we have to talk about the valve handle we just got. We've actually passed by where we need to use it several times already, actually twice even in this very part already. In the hallway where we encountered the final Mimicry Marcus last time that there's now zombies in, you may have noticed there's another door that I haven't investigated yet because you need the valve handle in order to actually open it. So we can just go put that over there and make our way into the next room. Starting off the background graphic designers though, so the artists who did all these incredible pre-rendered backgrounds. The first one credited is Satoru Hirano, who is only on a few games. They worked on this, they worked on A Realm Reborn for web programming, and they did voiceover supervising for Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops when that originally released on the PSP. Afterwards, we got Hirotaka Moriyama, who did work on this, Dragon Quest Treasures. They were a studio manager. They did some graphics work for the 2 Namco Museum games on the PSP, and then they did some designing for this Japan-exclusive DS mystery series that I don't know the full title of. Afterwards, we got Kiyoshi Haradai, who worked exclusively on this. After them is Eri Inoue, who worked on Oogie's Revenge in this for effect designing, Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins effect designing, general designer for Dead Rising on the Wii, as well as Mercenaries 3D and Revelations. They were also on the effects team for both of the versions of Worlds of Final Fantasy. Their most recent credit in particular is actually the art team for that new WarioWare game that came out last year. Before we continue on, there's actually a note we can find up here, and also down in the room below, there's actually some ammo I don't grab on the opposite side of the room. Investigators report 2. We should have finished with this dump long ago. When this all started, did anyone expect that there would be guns blazing away like this? We weren't told a thing about these creatures attacking us at the briefing. Guess they were surprised at the head honchos, too. The things in the woods, just starting to attack people. That had to be planned. Someone deliberately scattered that virus, no doubt about it. But the guards, our fellow soldiers, they must still be around. Well, whatever. Don't have to worry about that anymore. What I've got to worry about is whether to use my last bullet on myself or on a friend. That's the only decision I have to make. There's a couple of notes like that through the series, and they always hit the same level of, ooh, my heart. The reason we came up here, though, is that once again we can find some red chemical for Rebecca's mixing set, which might seem out of nowhere, because we already made the stripping agent for that leech back in the lab. But if you think back to that note I read out that I didn't actually find in the game, because I never entered that room outright in the LP, that particular note had recipes for 2 combinations of chemicals, and they both use the red chemical. So now we just need to find the new other chemical to use this other new combination on whenever we have to find it for. Yeah, though, down here, though, in the first naked zombie room of the game, I went to the left towards the ladder and towards this door onwards to the right of the screen. But if you turn to right from the entrance, there's another area that leads, I believe, to some handgun bullets that aren't really worth my time to get at this point. Getting back to the background graphic designers, though. After Eri Inoue is Yuya Okado, who was a character animator for Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins as well as a model designer. They did some castle modeling as well for Fire Emblem Fates in general. They did some map modeling for Worlds of Final Fantasy. They were an environment artist for Crisis Core Reunion. But they were a programmer for Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 as well as the original release of MVC 3. But they were a programmer for A Realm Reborn, Heavensward, and Stormblood in various amounts. Next up after them is Motohisa Tominaga, who was a graphic designer on this. They were a background designer for Gregory Horror Show. They did some effects for Oogie's Revenge, general designer for Revelations and Mercenaries 3D, but they were still a background artist by the time Revelations 2 wrapped around. And once again, map modeling team, environment artists on World of Final Fantasy in Crisis Core Reunion. Which, for those that missed me talking about a certain company in another LP, that might seem like a big spread. That's because I'm assuming a lot of these people work for Tosei, since they were mentioned outright in one of the Fire Emblem Fates credits we've already mentioned. Tosei is a shadow company that has worked with a lot of other major developers over the years in Japan. They haven't put out many of their own games. In fact, their logo is seldom seen in the games they work on. But they're the creators of the Starfy series, and they've worked on a lot of games that you would not expect. In the legendary Starfy fan translation LP I did a few months back, probably by the time this gets uploaded, I went into that pretty much in depth, considering that's one of the few games they actually put their logo on outright. Heck, the next person in the background graphic designers is much the same tale. Worked on this, designer for Revelations and Mercenaries 3D, background artist in Revelations 2, did some landscape modeling for Breath of the Wild, and a project manager on Crisis Core Reunion. That was Ryuji Tamura, by the way. After them, a lot of the same stuff. Makiko Nihari, Resident Evil 0, background in character art for Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins, a designer for FF1's PSP port, artist on My Sims Agent, designer on Revelations and Mercenaries 3D, background artist on Revelations 2, castle modeling on Fire Emblem Fates, landscape modeling on Breath of the Wild, which is a bit of a different swap, artist on Splatoon 2, asset design for New Horizons, environment art for Origami King, landscape art for Tears of the Kingdom. Before we get back to the rest of the background graphic designers, we do have another note in this room to read, and it's rather pertinent to the chemical we picked up a few moments ago. Also, make sure you grab that first aid spray. Just call it a hunch. About battery fluid. Battery fluid. The fluid used in batteries is a diluted solution of mixed water and sulfuric acid. Both must be of high purity. When fully charged, battery fluid should have a specific gravity of 1.28 plus or minus 1/100th at 20 Celsius. Battery acid purity. Take care that the dilute sulfuric acid solution is of a sufficient purity. Keep that in mind for later. For now, let's get into this room. Next up in the background graphic designers is Jianping Chu, who only really worked on this. Same with Qin Hao Zhu. Exact same deal. Yan Huang is the next person credited after them, who worked on this, Skull and Bones as a model artist, as recently as this year, and SmackDown vs. Raw 2010, funnily enough, as a 3D artist. After them is Sheng Zhu, who worked on this, Killzone Shadowfall, and was a 3D artist on Star Ocean: The Divine Force. Beware the frogs, by the way. These are lurkers. Lurkers only have 2 attacks: swiping their tongue at you to do damage, and swallowing you whole no matter what your health is. A lot of enemies I will try to run away from in this series. Kill lurkers on sight, because they'll probably try to grab you or your AI partner if you just try to run past them. I hate lurkers. They're cousins of a certain hunter type from Resident Evil 3, if you can't tell. Ugh. Either way, getting back to the background graphic designers, next up is Haining Zhang, who worked on this, Layer on the PS3 in SmackDown vs. Raw 2010 once again. Then next is Ying Chen, who worked on this, Magna Carta 2, as well as being credited as a Perfect World China team member on Neverwinter, which for those that don't know that is a Dungeons & Dragon MMO that's been running since 2013 that doesn't get a lot of talk about it. And to my knowledge, that's probably because it's not exactly anything super remarkable. I don't play a lot of MMOs to begin with. FF14 is the one I put the most time into over the years, and even then, that's largely because I like its story more so than how it plays. Next up in the background graphic designers, though, is Hairongu Tang, who only worked on this. After them is Hu Jun, who worked on this, SmackDown vs. Raw 2008, the re-release for Dead Rising, the video game adaptation of Night at the Museum 2, weirdly, as well as SmackDown vs. Raw 2010. Time for another note. Treatment Plant Manager's Diary. May 10th. Damn it! Why is normal industrial waste being delivered here? This is an umbrella corporation facility. We can't deal with this volume of material. Plus, they're sending us contaminated materials that we can't process. What are we supposed to do with it? July 24th. Well, looks like they're closing it down. Not surprising, using it like they did. Had to be done, but it was pretty sudden. It's not like they cared until now. Anyway, as long as I get out of here, I don't care what they do. It's probably the only guy that really seems to have gotten out with no real worries. Either way, rounding out the background graphic designers is Etsuko Hirose, whose only credits are on this, as well as its re-release, as well as being a background designer for Mega Man X Command Mission, the RPG I'll need to cover at some point. For now, let's just head down this elevator because we've done all we can up on this higher floor of this room, for now at least. If you were paying attention as I was talking about other stuff, there was a panel you could investigate around here, but you need an item in order to effectively use that. So we're just going to go and get that item instead of investigating it. I would recommend saving the previous save room if you haven't yet, by the way. Just call it a hunch. Because this room seems kind of narrow, doesn't it? That's a door we can't open yet. I sure hope nothing happens when I walk around here. I'm back! How the Proto-Tyrant got here, I have no idea. But here it is, and it still moves about the same speed and has a good amount of health. But since you now have two characters who probably have some decent weaponry, you can chew through this thing's health super fast. The big thing to watch out for is that since now there's two people, that also means it might start aggroing onto your AI partner, and if that's the case, you might want to keep an eye on their health. Don't use all your magnum ammo on it. Use maybe a couple shots, but then go all in with handgun bullets and shotgun stuff, whatever you got. Grenade rounds can also be pretty useful here. Once again, when it goes deep down on the ground and starts switching, you know you're done, and make sure you don't fire an extra bullet after that, just to save what you got for what we have. I find the fact we fight this thing again pretty weird, but I guess maybe it's to keep it in line with other tyrants, because I think basically every other tyrant in the series, you fight a minimum of twice. Usually in a form like this, and then when you down it once, it gets back up for a second win, maybe like 5 to 10 minutes later, and then you kill it for good after that. Usually with some form of an explosive. Because that's the case with the T-002 from Resi 1. Mr. X is that in both versions of Resi 2. Nemesis kind of speaks for himself overall. Code Veronica, yeah, that's the case. Technically Gaiden, that's the case. That's just what tyrants seem to like to do for some reason. Don't know why, but it makes it predictable, at least, I guess. With that said, now we have finished off the tyrant, so we don't have to worry about them again. And I'm not joking, it does not come back again. It's just dead. So we can come over here and lower this particular ladder. So now we can climb this ladder to get to another portion of the previous floor, where a key item, of course, is awaiting for us. But in the meanwhile, I do want to talk about something. I probably already did a post-edit to slightly talk about this, but I did only name one character artist a few parts back, who's Shinkiro, who worked on all the SNK stuff and was also a background artist for this game in general. But there's another character designer I should talk about on top of them. But first, let's grab the key item over here. This is a motherboard cartridge. So we can now take this back to the panel on the other portion of this room and progress that way. So the other character artist for this game is Shinsuke Komaki, who started off as an uncredited graphic designer for Mega Man X3. They were then publicity designing for Mega Man 8 and Battle and Chase, as well as Resident Evil 2. But they were a robot designer for Misadventures of Tron Bonne. They did the Metal Walker design for Metal Walker. They were an illustrator for Battle Network as a sub-series period, as well as did some visual design stuff for Mega Man X6. But they stayed with the Mega Man stuff the entirety of the Battle Network into the Star Force trilogy as well. They were an illustrator for that. Their most recent credits, though, are things like Yaiba, Ninja Gaiden Z, Recore, and a designer participant with Concept Inc. on Mighty No. 9, so they left Capcom. It's the control panel for the gondola. The motherboard is missing. Without the motherboard, the gondola can't receive electric current. Hence why we didn't investigate this at first, because I needed the motherboard first. But now that we have it, we've restored power to the gondola. So the gondola is another moment where we're forced to split up our two party members. It's a small gondola. Rebecca could probably ride in it. Get in the gondola? Sure. And now Rebecca's all the way over here. Billy will have things to do in a few moments. I guess technically next part more accurately. But Rebecca is going to be in the forefront for the next little bit. But first we want to come over here to this lever that operates the floodgate of the dam, and we want to turn it. That now gives Billy another route to get to our general area as well. Notably, there are some acid rounds over here, and these will come in handy eventually, but I think I actually end up leaving these here because I need to pick up other items in the next couple rooms anyway. At least until early next part, I think. Barring the floodgate to get Billy a new route to get to places, the main note of interest for Rebecca in this set of rooms is in the next room in specific. And I probably should note, the treatment plant is interesting in that it has a lot of floors, technically, counting the elevator we first used to get down here. But most of the floors are very small. At most, they're like 6 rooms on average. Some of those rooms have several sections to them. So you can get through this place pretty quickly. But also notably, there's the blue chemical over here, which when combined with the red chemical gives us sulfuric acid. And if we think about the note we read earlier, if we find some good high purity water, we can combine that and make some battery fluid. Also, hey, plague crawlers, one of the few times we get to see them in this part of the game. Frankly, you don't even really need to fight this one. The main reason I am is because I do come back to this room a couple of times, and it's worth killing with handgun bullets enough for that. You could use the magnum shots to do that, but that's overkill. Oh, hey, look, industrial water, so that's probably high purity. So, if we combine that with our sulfuric acid in our chemical mixing set, we now have battery fluid. And thankfully it doesn't take up an inventory space, so I'm free to grab those acid rounds. In fact, after I grab these, I speed up and go grab the ones in the previous room just to save a little bit of time. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 13, we start approaching the final endgame. See you guys then.